All right, welcome to week number 7 of our Throne Room series. In this series, we are following the admonition, the encouragement of Paul, who said to the believers in Colossae, if you have been raised with Christ, keep seeking the things above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God, in a place, on a seat, on a throne. He says, keep thinking about things above, not things on the earth. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. There's so much there. There's so much application to 3 verses like that. But one of the things that we're doing is we are saying, okay, so there are these visions and revelations of the Lord that are authorized in the Scriptures, about a dozen or so cases in which people actually caught a vision of the one on the throne and the throne room reality that exists in the heavens, that we have a space in, that we have access to, and that we should be interacting with while here on the earth. And so today, we're going to look at another one of those accounts. A.W. Tozer said 2 generations ago, he said, to regain her lost power, the church must see heaven opened and have a transforming vision of God. But the God we must see is not the utilitarian God who is having such a run of popularity today. The God we must learn to know is the majesty in the heavens. And I do see how gaining this vision of God, the vision that Old Testament and New Testament authors had, will indeed reconnect us to the power of the Holy Spirit that has been given to the church. And so today, we go to the vision of Ezekiel. And we're going to see Ezekiel and the mobile throne that he got to experience in vision in Babylon. First, a little bit of, what is it?
Best band name.
There you go. The band names. Ezekiel and the mobile throne. All right, so first, a little bit of history about Ezekiel, the setting of the book of Ezekiel. Those of you who know some of your Old Testament history know that Babylon came and destroyed the city of Jerusalem in 3 different sieges. They didn't completely just come in and burn the whole city, but they came in 3 different sieges, each one worse than the last. And so 605 BC was the first one, 597 BC was the second one, and 586 BC was the final one. And it was led by the general of the army who would eventually become the king, which was Nebuchadnezzar. In these first 2 sieges, 605 and 597, there was a great captivity that happened. And so a great leading away of the people. There was in 586 as well, but more happened in 605 and 597. Leading the people, certain people, away from Jerusalem, taking them captive all the way to Babylon. One notable person that was led away in 605 was Daniel with his buddies Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And then in 597, you have about a 25 or so year old priest, a guy in training to become a priest named Ezekiel. He was led away in the group in 597. And so that brings us to Ezekiel and his timeline with Jerusalem history. Jeremiah, another prophet, stayed throughout the entire time. He never left. He was never taken away. He actually gained some favor with Nebuchadnezzar. Pretty cool story there in the book of Jeremiah. But Daniel, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, all contemporaries of one another. So the book of Ezekiel starts about 5 years into Ezekiel's exile. So if he was taken captive in 597, about 5 years later, 592 or so, is when we come into the book of Ezekiel. So he's been in Babylon now for about 5 years. And if he was taken captive at the age of 25, 5 years later, now he's 30. Very good. And so we're going to find out, we're going to be introduced to a 30-year-old man at the beginning of the book. All in all, the book of Ezekiel is phenomenal. It's wonderful. There's 48 chapters. It's filled with visions and prophecies and prophetic acts, and it's wild and it's awesome. And so we'll just mainly focus in on one chapter today, which is Ezekiel chapter number 1, to see this vision and revelation that he received. Now I'm going to show you an old tiny picture here first from over 100 years ago. This is kind of an artist's sketch of Ezekiel in Babylon, looking out over the river and seeing this four-faced angelic being, and then these wheels, a wheel there within a wheel. And we'll talk about that wheel. And then one on the throne above some clouds, and then eventually a hand reaching out. This is more Ezekiel chapter number 2, a hand reaching out and saying, I have a message for you. I want you to eat it, consume it, understand it, internalize it, and then go preach it to the people. So here's more of a CGI one, more of a modern one, that it kind of just focuses in on Ezekiel chapter number 1. So again, you see the bottom, you see a beach scene, which Ezekiel's on a beach, right, next to a river at least. And then you see this massive expanse, and then these kind of creatures. So I thought what I'd do is I'm just going to leave that up while I read for you Ezekiel chapter number 1. So just kind of stare at that picture as I read the text, and then we'll unpack it and then ask the question, what does this teach us about the throne room of God today and about the one who sits on the throne? You ready? All right, here we go. Ezekiel chapter number 1. It says, on July 31st of my 30th year, while I was with the Judean exiles beside the Kibar River in Babylon, the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. This happened during the 5th year of King Jehoiakim's captivity. The Lord gave this message to Ezekiel, son of Buzi, a priest, beside the Kibar River in the land of the Babylonians. And he felt the hand of the Lord take hold of him. As I looked, I saw a great storm coming from the north, driving before it a huge cloud that flashed with lightning and shone with brilliant light. There was fire inside the cloud, and in the middle of the fire glowed something like gleaming amber. From the center of the cloud came 4 living beings that looked human, except that they each had 4 faces and 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and their feet had hooves like those of a calf, and they shone like burnished bronze. Under each of their 4 wings I could see human hands. So each of the 4 beings had 4 faces and 4 wings. The wings of each living being touched the wings of the beings beside it. Each one moved straight forward in any direction without turning around. Each had a human face in the front, the face of a lion on the right side, the face of an ox on the left side, and the face of an eagle at the back. Each had 2 pairs of outstretched wings. One pair stretched out to touch the wings of the living being on either side of it, which you don't really get in this perspective, right? They're kind of spaced out, but he's seeing more of a touching as they extend their wings. They went in whatever direction the Spirit chose, and they moved straight forward in any direction without turning. The living beings looked like bright coals of fire or brilliant torches, and lightning seemed to flash back and forth among them. And the living beings darted to and fro like flashes of lightning. As I looked at these beings, I saw 4 wheels touching the ground beside them, 1 wheel belonging to each. The wheels sparkled as if made of beryl. All 4 wheels looked alike and were made the same. Each wheel had a second wheel turning crosswise within it. The beings could move in any of the 4 directions they faced without turning as they moved. It's the 3rd time he said that. The rims of the 4 wheels were tall and frightening, and they were covered with eyes all around. When the living beings moved, the wheels moved with them. When they flew upward, the wheels went up too. The spirit of the living being was in the wheels. So wherever the Spirit went, the wheels and the living beings also went. When the beings moved, the wheels moved. When the beings stopped, the wheels stopped. When the beings flew upward, the wheels rose up, for the spirit of the living beings was in the wheels. Spread out above them was a surface like the sky, glittering like crystal. Beneath the surface, the wings of each living being stretched out to touch the other's wings, and each had 2 wings covering his body. As they flew, their wings sounded to me like waves crashing against the shore, or like the voice of the Almighty, or like the shouting of a mighty army. When they stopped, they let down their wings. As they stood with wings lowered, a voice from beyond the crystal surface above them spoke. Above this surface was something that looked like a throne made of blue lapis lazuli. And it sounds like something you get on your pizza. And on this throne, high above, was a figure whose appearance resembled a man. From what appeared to be his waist up looked like gleaming amber, flickering like a fire. From his waist down he looked like a burning flame, shining with splendor. All around him was a glowing halo, like a rainbow, shining in the clouds on a rainy day. This is what the glory of the Lord looked like to me. When I saw it, I fell face down on the ground, and I heard someone's voice speaking to me. And then it's going to come his call into prophetic ministry. What a vision! Remarkable. God is other, right? We kind of get a sense of that when we're first introduced to the gift of tongues. First time you ever hear somebody speak in tongues, you're like, what? What's weird? And we use the word weird because it's just a common word in our language, but really what they're saying is that's so other, that's so not normal. That's almost like from another world. That's not what people in this realm do. It's like something from another realm. Yeah, that's exactly right. Right? I get that again, that same other feeling when I read things like this. It's just the wheels within the wheels full of eyes. It's other. But it's a good reminder on a Sunday morning that God is other. He's not exactly like us. All right, so let's break down first 6 main elements of this vision before we ask our questions this morning. So the first main element is the storm cloud. The storm cloud. So this is a divine storm cloud, and this is something that's pretty typical with other writers that Ezekiel would have known about, writers that wrote before Ezekiel, meaning stories similar to this divine storm cloud were in Ezekiel's Bible, so you kind of knew about them. It says, then Yahweh answered Job. Listen to Job. Yahweh answered Job out of the whirlwind and said. So when Job received the long message from the Lord about, I won't go into all what it's about, but when he received this response from the Lord, it came in a divine storm cloud, in a whirlwind. How about in 2 Kings? Remember the Elijah experience. Now, what else says? And Elijah and Elisha, still went on and talked. Behold, chariots of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them, and Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. A divine storm cloud carried Elijah into heaven. That's in Ezekiel's Bible. He's got a framework there. Another one that's in Ezekiel's Bible is this song, written by David in Psalms 18. It says how Yahweh bowed the heavens and came down, and thick darkness was under his feet. And the whole thing, if you read Psalms 18, it's all the stormy chaos that the Lord is bringing to the earth as he's defending David. So Ezekiel has some context for that. Sort of like Josh, if you had a vision of Joanna walking on the water, like that would be cool. And Joanna's never walked on the water, but you have a framework for that. You're like, I got a story for that. I could turn to Matthew 14 and show a person walking on the water. So all I'm saying is it's like that. It's anchored in something that he's familiar with, this divine storm cloud. Number 2, 4 living creatures. 4 living creatures. Now, in the temple that was erected in Jerusalem during Ezekiel's day, which was built by Solomon. So Solomon's temple in Jerusalem that was standing as Ezekiel is in Babylon. In the Holy of Holies were 4 cherubim. 2 of them were massive. They're like, 10 or 15 feet tall. And so if you were walking to the Holy of Holies in Solomon's temple, you'd see these massive 2 cherubim. And then if you look down at the little Ark of the Covenant, you would see 2 cherubim on the mercy seat. And so technically there's 4 cherubim in the Holy of Holies. And so as he sees these 4 living creatures, they are cherubim. He calls them cherubim in Ezekiel chapter number 10. He has a framework for the 4. Remember, Isaiah has this authorized seraphim vision. Isaiah chapter number 6, I saw the Lord high and lifted up, and I saw these 4 creatures, and they were burning, right? That was Isaiah's vision, and that would have been, about 120, 130 years before. I think Ezekiel would have known about Isaiah's vision, where he saw these 4 beings around the throne, and they were all on fire. So as Ezekiel sees 4 beings on fire, he has a context for that. Also, it's in his songbook. So Psalms 104. I hope that at the end of the series, we read our Bible and we don't just go past things like this, but like things catch us. These visionary things. We understand that God's people are are visionaries. They see with the eyes of their heart. So Psalms 104, Yahweh makes his messengers winds, his ministers a flaming fire. So wind and flaming fire, angels are like flaming fire is a song that Ezekiel would have sung. And that's what he sees. He sees these angelic beings, and they're like flaming fires, and they're going back and forth like lightning. What else did he see? He saw the wheels. Now, I'll tell you more about the wheels in a minute, but let me just say this, that in Solomon's temple, in the temple in Jerusalem, that it was everything to Ezekiel, most of the components in there had wheels on them. It was a difference from Moses' tabernacle to Solomon's permanent temple. A lot of the things got wheels on them. And so wheels were a common thing, and I'll show you some really significant wheels when we ask one of our questions in a minute. All right. Next, the crystal surface above, that great expanse. Now, this is the very first full vision of the throne room that anybody received that we can tell was Moses. We looked at that in week number 3 of our series. Moses and 74 others, they went up and they saw, or 73 others, they went up and they saw God, and they kind of interacted in his throne room, and it says they saw the same expanse in the sky, this kind of platform. So if you remember Exodus 24:10, there they, Moses and the rest, saw the God of Israel. Under his feet there seemed to be a surface of brilliant blue lapis lazuli, as clear as the sky itself. So I guarantee you he knew this. Ezekiel had this verse memorized, no question. He had this verse memorized because they had to memorize the Torah as they were studying for the priesthood. So he has this verse memorized, and so when he sees the expanse, he thinks immediately of Exodus 24. Okay, then the another element was the blue throne. The blue throne. I won't say anything else about the blue throne right now other than it was a blue throne. All right, and then number 6, he sees the divine man. The divine man. It's God, but in the form of a man. Now, most scholars today would tell you that any time in the Old Testament you see God in the form of a man, it's the pre-incarnate Christ. It's Jesus in the Old Testament, what they might call a Christophany. And so I imagine Ezekiel would have maybe thought about the burning bush experience. We know that was Christ. We know that was Jesus, where Moses encountered a man in a burning bush who was God, who was the angel of the Lord, who was the Lord. And then how about the Jacob series where Jacob wrestles with a man, he's an angel, but he's the Lord, and he gets this divine title and could have been a pre-incarnate Christ. Or what will come after this Ezekiel passage is Daniel, and he'll see the Son of Man vision. So this is a revelation the Lord is giving during this time period. But this divine man, it's God, but in the form of a man. This is going to prepare them for God to become a man in a few centuries in the person of Jesus. So these are the 6 main elements of it. And then now let's ask our questions this morning. What does Ezekiel's vision teach us about the throne room? Number 1. From the throne, Yahweh sees everything. It probably sounds less than spectacular as point number 1, doesn't it? You're like, we all knew that. Did that even need to be a slide? But there's such a difference between knowing this, knowing what the words mean and understanding this, and then feeling this. And Ezekiel certainly felt this in a powerful way. The eyes of these creatures take main stage in Ezekiel's vision. Look at Ezekiel 10. It says, both the cherubim and the wheels were covered with eyes. Imagine a being covered with eyes from head to toe. Wild. Creepy. Probably eyes that blink. And then the wheels covered with eyes. So you see these things moving all around, and you just see eyes flashing, right? Cherubim had eyes all over their bodies, including their hands. How about eyes on your hands, John? How would that be helpful? And their backs, and on their wings. So God has created these beings to see and behold his glory first. So we know the the beings are first, they're covered with eyes so they can see the Lord in all of his glory and behold his glory. So that's a privilege. To have more than two eyes, I guess, is an advantage there. But then number two, he's created these beings to watch and report on what is going on in the earth. So the eyes are to see the Lord and they're to see you. They're to see the Lord and they're to see the affairs of the earth. So these wheels don't stay in heaven. These wheels have come to the earth and they move to and fro in the earth. Wheels, divine wheels, God-created wheels covered with eyes that move in the earth. For what reason? Well, you remember the Job story. What did the Lord ask Satan? He's like, hey, what have you seen? What's your report? You've gone into the earth today on this Tuesday, Satan. What do you see? And he brings an accusation. That none of them love you for real. They only love you because of what you do for them. But it's a report that he's bringing to the throne room. And so there's this sense in which God has, one of the purposes of angels or his created beings that are not human is for them to go into the earth and see things and report back to him. Look at one of the things that they're looking for, 2 Chronicles 16:9. For the eyes of Yahweh run to and fro throughout the whole earth to give strong support to those whose heart is blameless toward him. So this idea of send out messengers as my eyes and bring back and find the people whose hearts are blameless, because I want to strengthen them. I want to send angels on assignment to strengthen those. You say, well, couldn't a Lord of omniscience and omnipresence do that himself? Yeah, he can do everything himself. He doesn't need any of us. But this is the way in which he chooses to run his universe. There's a specific type of angelic creature called a watcher. And in his name is this very purpose, right? There are angels that are just watchers. And it seems like what these wheels are. They're watchers. So Daniel 4:13-14. Nebuchadnezzar writes, I saw in the visions of my head as I lay in my bed, and behold, a watcher, a holy one, came down from heaven. He proclaimed aloud and said thus, chop down the tree and lop off its branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the beasts flee from under it and the birds from its branches. And I won't go into what all that means. I just want you to see that there's this being called a watcher, an angelic being called a watcher that came down from heaven and gave a prophetic word. What does a watcher do? He watches, right? He watches who? He watches maybe the glory of the Lord, but then he watches us. He watches us. He watches the earth. There's this repeated thing that we've now seen in these throne room visions, which is men in a state of grief who need to be reminded that the Lord sees them. So Job, in his pain and agony, he encounters the one in the whirlwind to get an answer. Isaiah, grieving the death of King Uzziah. It was in the year that King Uzziah died. This is the setting. This grief is the setting. This loss is the setting for the vision. John in Patmos, he's exiled because they possibly tried to kill him, then they couldn't kill him, so they exiled him to Patmos. So in his grief, I'm separated from the church. My ministry is over. They tried to kill me. What am I doing here? But he worshipped on the Lord's day, and he had the Revelation vision. The book of Revelation came to him, right? We see men in their grief. Babylon, or Ezekiel, he's been carried away as a captive, right? He never got to fulfill the priesthood that he dreamed of fulfilling. I was 25. I didn't even get to my 30th birthday. You can't be a priest until you're 30. I was 5 years short, right? And now here I am. And I'm in a pagan land, and oh my goodness, this is awful. And then he has this vision of the Lord. So there's this repeated thing that Yahweh gives visions. The one on the throne wants to meet people with visions to say, I see you in your time of need. I see you. I have creatures all throughout the kingdom looking for those who are in grief, looking for those whose hearts are blameless. I have eyes everywhere. I see everything that's going on. And I want to remind you of that through this encounter with my presence. The Lord communicates to Ezekiel, I see you. I see all that's going on. I know, now I want you to see so you can know and prophesy from my perspective. Ezekiel, I see. I know all that's going on. I know what's going on in Jerusalem, and I'm about to give you a vision of what's actually happening in Jerusalem. I see, the Lord says, and I know, because I have eyes everywhere. Now I want you to see, and I want you to know. That way you can be my messenger and carry my message. The Lord sees. Yahweh Yireh, the Lord sees. Next, number 2. What does this teach us? Oh, I'm sorry. I said Yahweh Yireh. Yahweh Ra'ah. There we go. Next, the throne room is mobile. The throne room is mobile. So the original tabernacle, which was a facsimile of the throne room, Moses' tabernacle, a facsimile of the throne room, was a mobile throne room, right? It was a tent. You can pick it up and move it. A mobile throne room is what the tabernacle was. But the glory of the Lord never left the tabernacle presence. The glory of the Lord stayed on the Ark of the Covenant. So we have a mobile throne room, but the glory doesn't move to like another nation. The glory stays right there. Now Ezekiel sees a mobile throne and a mobile throne room, but it's moved to Babylon. And the glory has moved with it. And this is massively important to Ezekiel, right? God's glory is not limited to a geographical place, and God's presence can be accessible anywhere in the earth, is the message that's communicated to Ezekiel that he's able to preach to all the captives in Babylon. He says the glory of the Lord, that we only knew that the glory of the Lord stayed on the Ark of the Covenant in Jerusalem. It's like that. Jerusalem is where the glory of the Lord is supposed to stay. And now it's moved. And now the glory is in Babylon. And now the presence is in Babylon. And oh my goodness, right? My priestly dreams are coming true. Only one priest got to be the high priest, and only the high priest got to see the glory of the Lord, right? Ezekiel would have been one of 90,000 or so priests. Probably he had a 1 in 90,000% chance to be the one who would be able in Jerusalem at the age of 30 or above to go into the Holy of Holies and see the glory of the Lord. So slim pickings, slim chance that Ezekiel would have ever been able to see the glory of the Lord. And he's in despair. I can't be a priest in Jerusalem, and now I'm in Babylon. But now he gets to see the glory of the Lord for himself. Oh, this was thrilling to him. The throne room is mobile. It's on the move. The throne room could be reproduced here in this house. The throne room, elements of the throne room could come here in Westchester. It's not reserved for Jerusalem. Anywhere. God's presence can be moved anywhere, can be found anywhere. There's much to say about that because God's presence is now in the church, but we'll get to that in future lessons. Now let me show you this about the throne room being mobile. So the tabernacle was a mobile throne room, temporary mobile throne room that got to move all around the wilderness and got to go to Shiloh and Jerusalem and everywhere else, Gibeon. But then David says, I want to build you a permanent structure, no longer a tent. King David says, I want to build you a permanent structure, Lord. And so he gathered all the resources. He got all the plans from the mind of the Lord. And then he says, Solomon, you build it. We know the story, right? Tabernacle, temple. When David was inquiring of the Lord as to what should the Holy of Holies look like? What should the Ark of the Covenant look like now, Lord? Are there any changes you want me to make from what Moses did? What should teach me more, Lord? I imagine David saying, teach me more, Lord, about the Holy of Holies, about the Ark of the Covenant, about the representation of your throne in the earth. Look at what the Lord taught David. 1 Chronicles chapter 28. It says, David designated the amount of refined gold for the altar of incense. And finally, he gave Solomon a plan for Yahweh's chariot. He now calls the Ark of the Covenant Yahweh's chariot. And the gold cherubim whose wings were stretched over the ark of Yahweh's covenant. And then he adds, every part of this plan, David told Solomon, was given to me in writing from the hand of Yahweh. Woo! And so from that moment on, when they would talk about the Ark of the Covenant, they talked about it as Yahweh's chariot. Yahweh's chariot. It's like he was baking that into their understanding. And so now as he sees the throne of God moving across. He's like, oh yeah, there's the chariot. The chariot is on the move, right? The chariot is on the move. His throne is on the move. His throne is coming to me. The chariot here is the Merkava in Hebrew. A lot of writing on that concept. But every king should have a chariot, and that chariot should be amazing in the ancient world, right? You see the king. The king's coming to town. What's he riding? He's not going to ride something simple. He's going to ride something majestic. And this is what Ezekiel sees in his vision. That vision that we showed at the very beginning, it's Yahweh's grand chariot bringing his presence through the heavens. Awesome. Again, something like this in his Bible. Yahweh, my God, you are very great, Psalms 104 says. You are clothed with splendor and majesty, covering yourself with light as with a garment, right? Like a rainbow. Stretching out the heavens like a tent, like in the tabernacle. He lays the beams of his chambers on the waters, and he makes the clouds his chariot. He rides on the wings of the wind. And then Ezekiel got to see it. He sung about it for so long, and then he got to see it. That's one of the joys of growing in the Lord. You sing about these realities of your faith, and then all of a sudden you start to experience them. That's what Ezekiel is experiencing here. That's a song that I've been singing, and now I get to see it myself. Number 3. So Yahweh, the one on the throne, sees everything, all the eyes. The throne room is mobile. Number 3, throne room visions are based in reality, and they contain predictable elements. So hopefully I've shown you that if you were to just have sat down and read Ezekiel chapter number 1 or chapter 10 last week, you'd been like, is this a psychedelic trip? Like, what in the world is he seeing, But now, hopefully you can be like, oh, actually all of those are predictable elements that Ezekiel would have known what to do with, right? So, throne room visions, still today, are based in reality, not in the person who's having the vision, not just in their imagination. They're built in reality. This is an actual person with an actual throne in the heavens. And if we were to see a vision of that throne room, it would have some predictable elements to it, right? So if a teacher comes along next year to you and says, hey, I've had a vision of the throne room, and you say, oh, do tell. And they say, well, there's jello as the floor, and there's little fairies that fly all the way around. And the genie from Aladdin is actually the one who meets you when you first come in. And if they describe sensational elements that are not rooted in the reality of the dozen authorized visions that we have, you have reason to say, I think that's a vain imagination. Because I can't find that anywhere in the Bible. Because every throne room experience in the scriptures was based in reality and had some predictable elements. Now, you always see one or two things that might be different, right? So, for instance, if you were to see, if the Lord were to give you some insight into the throne room, some throne room vision in your own mind today, and you saw beautiful white flowers cascading down one side of the throne, but then you were to see the throne and you were to perceive the love of the Father, and maybe you were to see a crystal river, or maybe you were to kind of hear the holy, holy, holy deep in your heart being echoing through heaven, or experience the joy of the untold multitudes before the throne, or maybe feel some of the grief of the martyrs that are underneath the throne saying, how long, Lord, until you avenge our blood? If you experience some elements of those things, and then you were to see some beautiful white flower petals, that would be okay, right? Because it's consistent with a throne room reality that we see all throughout the scriptures. But if you're hearing about Jello monsters and we all eat Skittles and Twizzlers grow out as our hair, you can just say, I think that's a vain imagination. I'm not bound at all to believe that that's what a heavenly experience is going to be like. I only say that because each of these features I just said are actually contained in teachings about people concerning the throne room. Here we go. Based in reality, they contain predictable elements. Number 4, throne room visions can repeat and progress at the Lord's will. Oh, I love this one. They can repeat and progress at the Lord's will. So Ezekiel has this wonderful vision in Ezekiel 1. 14 months later, in Ezekiel 10, the vision repeats and progresses. So he doesn't just see the exact same thing, but now something else happens. Now another man, a man in linen, an angel dressed in linen, comes forth, and the one on the throne says, now, do you look there between the wheels? You see all those coals? Kind of like Isaiah saw the coals. See all those coals there? Take some coals and go scatter them over Jerusalem. And so the vision repeats, and then it progresses. And this is something we see in the visionary realm. That oftentimes, if the Lord gives you a vision, as simple or complex as it may be, then probably if you continue to commune with the Lord, he's going to repeat that vision because it's meaningful for you. It's a language that you and him develop together. And don't be surprised if the vision, if it progresses. If all of a sudden now I've had this vision before, but now, something else happened, right? Oh, I've seen the Lord in this way with the eyes of my heart before, but this time he also did this. It was so exciting. A progression in the visionary realm. We're learning about these visions because Acts chapter number 2 says this is the era, the New Testament era, and the New Testament church and New Testament believers get to experience some of the things that Ezekiel experienced: prophecy, dreams, and visions. That's what believers get to experience. And so visions. So we're acquainting ourselves with what to expect with visions, how to test visions a little bit, and then how the Lord will often extend a vision. Visions are anchored in previous authorized visions. They repeat and they progress. So the man in the linen, the coals, and then ultimately this throne room vision in chapter number 10 is going to go and sit right on top of Jerusalem at the temple. Wonderful. And then number 5, the one on the throne gives visions of future grace to produce hope in the hearts of his messengers. So what should you expect from these visions that you may or may not receive, John, throughout your life? I pray that you're a visionary and that you get visions all throughout your life. That would be a wonderful gift. And I think something that you should, in some sense, expect because of what Acts 2:17 and 18 says. The one on the throne gives visions of future grace to produce hope in the hearts of his messengers. So you should expect that some of the visions that the Lord gives you would be a vision of the future, of a grace-filled future. A vision of your ministry, a vision of your family, a vision of the earth, a vision of our nation, a vision of your church, a vision in which you see in the future a reality that you're like, that's the best case scenario. Oh my goodness, yes, right? So when your loved one is sick, seeing in a visionary realm them made healed and whole produces great hope in your heart and gives you strength to continue praying. It leads you to go over to their house. If you see a vision of them healed and whole and happy, then it leads you to go over to their house and pray with optimism and confidence, like, you're going to be healed. I believe you're going to be healed. I believe the Lord's given me a foreview, a vision of you in a healed state. And so let's pray with confidence and with boldness to see that reality come to place, right? This is what so many of the visions for Ezekiel were about. So that Ezekiel 10 vision, Ezekiel 1 was repeated in Ezekiel 10, and this is kind of the main takeaway from that vision. Ezekiel hears the Lord say, I, the sovereign Lord, will gather you back from the nations where you have been scattered, like you are right now in Babylon. And I will give them singleness of heart and put a new spirit within them. I will take away their stony, stubborn heart and give them a tender, responsive heart. So they will obey my decrees and regulations. Then they will truly be my people, and I will be their God. And that's everything that Ezekiel wanted to hear. Yes, 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 yes. And so no matter what kind of opposition he got to his sermons, no matter what kind of opposition, no matter how they responded in the now and now, I know that that's the vision of the future. That reality will come to pass. This is what the Lord says. This will come to pass. And so I will go on with hope because that future vision of grace has produced hope in my heart and strength to continue no matter what the current climate says. This is something that visions will do. This is one of the main purposes and functions of the visionary realm for the believer today, to give you a glimpse of future grace, to produce hope in your heart so that you can endure until the vision becomes a reality. Praise the Lord for visions. Praise the Lord for visions.